Chosen one, this moment is not a coincidence. Your soul was drawn to this video because the heavens whispered the same message to you 7 times. The number 1111 didn't appear before your eyes for nothing, and the prayers of 33 prophets did not fall upon you by chance. You are one of the 144,000 chosen, and your presence here is a divine sign. This message was sent to awaken the secret that has been resting within your heart. What you are about to hear are not just words, but divine vibrations that will sink deep into your soul. If these words are touching you, leave your heart in the comments so the heavens can witness your testimony. Because when you write, another soul will awaken. Now prepare yourself, for this video will illuminate your path. Those who recognize the signs of God know that nothing is random. That's why your being here is already a miracle. We are building a family of light, the first 1,000 souls. Be part of it. Subscribe to Chosen Archangel, press like, and leave your word in the comments. Excuses are insufficient to lessen the weight of fate. It dispels the false beliefs people make about themselves. A mirror of consequence eventually reflects its reflection. Additionally, it cannot be obscured by distractions, alcohol, or smoke. There is no whisper in that moment. A thunderclap is heard. The ground beneath those who believed they could dance on sacred lines without tripping is shaken by an unexpected storm. This is the most difficult fact to accept. A person is not fighting a single person when they undervalue a soul that has divine support. Eventually, the stones will return like fire since they are hurling them at the fundamental structure of equilibrium. What they initially believed to be a harmless game has now become an avalanche that is descending with no way out. However, most people overlook this twist. Your collapse was not rejection. It was the universe's method of establishing the throne that was exclusively yours. Their blindness served as a benefit rather than a drawback. Life was removing your distractions and honing you into something indestructible and untouchable while they believed they were throwing you away. There has never been a grave in loss. Until the day it explodes through the ground with a force so incredible that no one can dispute its might, it has always been a seed hidden deep, ignored, and undervalued. It was never the end of the trail. It served as the catalyst for your metamorphosis. The same money that purchased your rise. Now picture this. Those who formerly questioned you are now standing on the periphery of your horizon, observing as the doors they smashed in your face turn into gates leading to untouchable worlds. You will not be validated by their remorse. It will be the reverberation that comes after you ascend. The music for your triumphs. When they finally notice it, your value does not increase. You've always held it, burning like an ember, waiting for the proper wind, which is why it increases. The wind is here, too. In reality, the storm that attempted to shatter you was molding your wings and teaching you how to soar above those who cut themselves in terror. This goes beyond just survival. It has to do with elevation. You have been purified by what was intended to crush you. Your voice has been amplified by what was intended to silence you. Furthermore, they are not doomed by the calculation. It is your freedom, your indisputable evidence that fate may crown you without their consent. You're not like the others. You represent the infrequent meeting point of fate and truth. And those who have based their entire life on delusions are terrified of that type of power. The decision-making moment was never brief. One handheld evolved at the intersection, while the other clumsily decayed. Someone experienced what it was like to be accepted without disguises, without plans, without manipulation passed off as love. It was not a comforting experience. It was too brilliant, too pure. And fear forced them to retreat into the known rather than move forward. When love is genuine, it confronts rather than merely cradles, even if that familiarity was poison. Like a piece of unfinished art waiting to be finished, it extends a canvas on which every buried potential glows. The contemplation provided was not a dream. It was an honest revelation of who they might become if bravery prevailed over fear. However, the fractures were shown by the same reflection. The defenses were taught too early. The shadows have not yet been healed. Long enough to be believed, the lies were whispered. That exchange was too abrasive. Too truthful. You weren't a romanticized option. You served as an initiation. What was in front of them was serious. It was a call to transcend cycles and at last escape inherited patterns that seemed like curses. However, the weight of the lesson caused them to stumble rather than rise to the occasion. You weren't the only one taking the test. It concerned their decision to prioritize spiritual development over comfort and growth over stagnation. And they stumbled when the opportunity presented itself. Like glaring signals, each warning was etched into the narrative. However, the allure of loudness outweighed that of clarity. They allowed outside voices to tell what they never had the power to tell, leaned into beliefs that clouded their own knowledge, and allowed distrust to grow where trust ought to have been established. This collapse wasn't abrupt. Line by line, it was a painstaking unraveling, etched in their own hesitancy. The act of sabotage was not haphazard. It was planned. Sensing the change that real love could bring, hidden players had been hovering around, keeping a close eye on everything. Your link was dangerous to them because it took away their authority. These were no ordinary skeptics. They had a stake in maintaining confusion, depleting strength with each rumor and uncertainty they were able to sow. Don't keep it to yourself if God's goodness has touched you. Click Super. Thank you. Thus, a donation of at least $50 to aid in the dissemination of His light. Your generosity spreads like a wave of grace, enhancing hearts and expanding His dominion. Allow His excess to seep through you. They hung around like shadows masquerading as friends, consuming doubt and the back and forth that prevented you from moving fully into the truth. Their hollowness was revealed by the genius of what they had experienced with you. Therefore, it became evident that their goal was to reintegrate your individual into the same cycles that initially denied them their independence. What transpired was a betrayal of their own development as much as of you. They were rejecting not only love but also themselves the instant they turned their backs on the truth. And because the soul never forgets what it touched, that decision has a price that no amount of distraction can erase. And when it is gone, there is a hunger that will never go away. Some people are afraid of your light because it reveals something they have never dared to develop into, not because it makes them blind. Under the pretense of allegiance, the first shadow appeared. An old friend whose heart had never grown up enough to stop playing comparison games. Every statement oozed with the intention of causing doubt, even though they wrapped questions in silk. This is excessive, isn't it? Is it too soon? Their murmurs were not inquisitive. They were like anchors pulling on vulnerabilities that you already had to deal with. The second person had the grasp of control underneath the mask of devotion. As they tightened their grip and spoke in the language of protection, they transformed tenderness into chains. Panic set in as soon as they saw how your love was healing the scars that had held you back for years. Because your person's duty as a rescuer would be undermined if they were to rise into fullness. And the authority they established through reliance. Another presence lurked near the door of the past, never quite letting go of its claim. The evidence that your individual was able to give and receive love on a level they had never experienced was too much for their ego to handle. Your coming wasn't only a problem. It was indisputable proof that a new benchmark had been established. Their stealthy sabotage started in silently, under the guise of fake familiarity, as envy turned into action. Their energies clashed as though attracted by the same magnet, despite the fact that these forces never made a covenant. When the survival of people who vibrate at the frequency of deception is threatened by purity, they naturally band together. Your person became doubtful as they were still sorting out years of warped realities. They started to confuse stability with danger, intensity with recklessness, and calm with illusion. They leaned into the voices intended to destroy the sanctuary you were creating rather than having faith in it. Conversations with outsiders who had no right to speak on sacred ground were replayed. By doing this, they gave away fragments of your intimacy to individuals who had already shown themselves unable to respect their own happiness, let alone safeguard that of others. Your gestures were misinterpreted as warnings by the so-called buddy. They called it control if you wanted intimacy. They called it restriction if you guarded the link. Words were warped into weapons that were honed against your will. The relative, meanwhile, persuaded your person that change equated to desertion by framing every indication of development as stealing. They didn't realize the soil had been poisoned all along, so they mistakenly thought elevation meant loss. The deeper reality was that taking was never the purpose of your love. It was about providing a space free from the poisons of the past where actual roots could grow. For individuals who are addicted to control, however, change feels like a betrayal. Thus, the opposition became more vocal. What happened was more than just your bond being sabotaged. It demonstrated the lengths people would go to in order to maintain their delusions, even if it means sacrificing the freedom of others. Certain options appear to be safe, but they are actually cages. Not as love, but as a means of escape, the past reappeared as the dependable alternative, bearing ancient secrets like weapons. Unaware that the soul longs for storms that alter landscapes rather than stagnant seas that never move, they envelop themselves in the language of comfort and portray you as chaos. Your person unwittingly ceded control of their own fate by allowing these voices to enter. They handed control of their evolution to those who dreaded its growth, gave up the right to define serenity to those addicted to chaos, and permitted those who had never touched pure love to speak about it. Romans 10 verse 17 says, "Faith comes by hearing." Help more people hear. Subscribe, like, and comment to get us to 1,000 subscribers. Instead of being protected, it ended up in the hands of saboteurs. These powers orchestrated, not merely whispered. Discussions became campaigns. The rumors spread like wildfire. Stories that misrepresented your true nature started to be told to acquaintances, portraying devotion as dishonesty and light as shadow. Though it was little more than desperation, the character assassination was so planned that it may have been confused for planning. People who had never met you but were certain that you were dangerous heard twisted tales that spread farther. Driven by outsiders who thrived on drama and family members who were desperate to keep control, the story took off. Each lie was a stone added to the wall to prevent your individual from seeing the truth. The individual who initially said that they were the owner of your person went farther than the others, launching a barrage of charges intended to paint themselves as the victim. They skillfully concealed the fact that they had never fostered love in the first place by telling stories of betrayal and abandonment. Thus came the crucial day, a routine day with enormous significance. The choice was made clear. Remain confined to those who took full advantage of the freedom you provided or who used guilt and threats to influence you. Loyalty would be gone, one warned. The ex dangled false promises of regeneration while another wore a mask of control and compassion. Fear exerted more pressure than love, and they gave in to the crowd when authenticity and approval were pitted against each other. There was a cost to that surrender. They favored the past over change, guilt over freedom, and smallness over growth. And you weren't desperate when you answered. You left with the dignity of someone who understands that their worth is not determined by whether or not another person can see it. That quiet departure turned into the mirror that showed them what they had really lost. Someone who loved them enough to let them go, not someone who required them. They were left in the rubble of their own choice as the consequences quickly materialized as the very alliances they clung to revealed their true nature. Some teachings come in the form of affection. However, they are merely traps. The same oppressive patterns that earlier compelled your person to flee were offered by the past, which quietly circled, waiting for vulnerability. They returned to a prison of control, surrounded by people who seemed to love them but never really understood them, even if they believed they were choosing safety. The curtain gradually drew back. None of these individuals had labored to elevate your person, it became evident. They had only struggled to get rid of you. Their convenience in maintaining the status quo was always more important to them than their satisfaction. In your reality, something very different was taking place while they spiraled in confusion. You now have the courage to let go without fear thanks to the same fortitude that once enabled you to give love without boundaries. You let go of what had deceived you. You choose to embrace clarity, freedom, and alignment with your own value instead. For you, what others perceived as a loss was a gateway to a life of greater expectations, a more profound faith, and opportunities commensurate with your genius. You climbed as your individual fell farther into the ramifications of their own decisions. The energy you formerly invested in them started to fuel your growth, attracting experiences, growth, and connections that matched your frequency. You thrived in the brightness of fresh starts while they toiled under the burden of outdated cycles. News of your metamorphosis spread swiftly. Those who had previously muttered disparaging remarks about you were now uttering your name in wonder and praising your tranquility, luminosity, and indisputable ascent. And now the people who ripped you from their story had to deal with its fallout. The supposed friend had to put up with a lot of complaints. The interfering relative ended up taking care of a reduced spirit. Additionally, the ex-lover who plotted their way back was confronted with an unwinnable comparison. The envious ally became weary of the unrelenting hostility and regretted their own role in destroying something they would never be able to replace. The controlling figure realized your presence had not dulled but accentuated your person's eyes, and watched helplessly as the spark drained from them. And the person who put up the most effort to get them back found that what they believed to be a triumph was nothing but emptiness. Every touch was lifeless and every gesture was shallow in comparison to the profundity of what you had provided. Masks eventually disintegrated. Envy was shown by the friend. The relative's desire for power was made clear. Additionally, the previous love remained unaltered and undeserving of their demands. But as your person looked in the mirror, the worst truth was revealed. They realized that their loyalty had been to constraint rather than love. At last, they realized that your restrictions were cautions intended to keep them safe rather than attempts to dominate them. And in the silence of what they had lost, every word you had ever said about their values suddenly reverberated more loudly than before. It takes time for some facts to become apparent. And when they do, they precisely destroy illusions. Foresight was what your person used to call control. They regarded what they believed to be requests for expansion as invitations. Your requests for gifts were motivated by respect for the relationship itself rather than need. Jealousy wasn't the space you revered. It was respect for a unique thing that shouldn't be tainted by extraneous influences. The layers are now coming off. They are able to recognize the patterns, the planning, and the purpose of the interferences that ruined what was intended for them. It was all no accident. It was a concerted attempt by people who couldn't bear to see them flourish next to someone who could respect their soul. And that awareness is accompanied with agony. The kind that fundamentally destroys trust. Their fury is no longer just focused on the outside world. Their blindness has caused it to retreat inward. They are furious with themselves for giving away their joy so cheaply and for suppressing their intuition in favor of voices that profited on their frailty. Their anger over betrayal has subsided. Their own willingness to trade holy love for phony approval disgusts them. With their old habits, exhaustion sets in. Their inclination to conform to the expectations of those who profited from their smallness is something they can no longer tolerate. Additionally, the universal balance sheet has been balancing itself while they are tearing themselves apart in sorrow. The weight of their decisions is now being exposed to every hand that interfered with your relationship, with consequences coming just when they should. The realization comes gradually but steadily. They rejected their own metamorphosis by rejecting you. The path they believed to be safer turned out to be the most hazardous. Selecting comfort over awakening, stagnation over ascent. They were content with change masquerading as affection. The freedom they left behind is only now becoming apparent to them. And your reality appears very different while they struggle with these realities. You didn't break down. You didn't hold off. You made your own decision. Their rejection turned into your affirmation, and their absence into your freedom. You constructed, lifted, and prospered. You got stronger. Because of your resolve to never betray yourself again, not because of them. They eventually reached back, expecting a door to open, but all they saw was peaceful space. No animosity or hatred, only the calm of someone who has healed to the point that their sorrow is powerless and who has outgrown the need for approval. Peace and quiet were more powerful than any conflict ever could be. They came to see that you were now evidence that true strength comes from choosing oneself rather than from being picked by others. Only when they see the light of your freedom shining back at them do some people realize how valuable you are. Without them, they look for cracks, for indications that you're struggling. However, your success is the only news that they hear. They hear stories of your brightness, your serenity, and your undeniable happiness now that you're not exhausted by proving what ought to have been treasured, rather than stories of heartache. They become so shaken by it that they begin writing lengthy justifications that they would never dare to send. They only apologize in drafts. By citing outside factors, fear, or misunderstanding, each version attempts to obscure the reality of their decisions. When it mattered, they circled all the reasons except the true one. They lack the strength to respect the sacred. They are aware that words cannot change the past, regardless of how many times they rewrite the message. The so-called ally who used to play puppeteer is now having to deal with the fallout. Your person's memory is crisp and their eyes are sharp presently. They take the manipulator on directly. No more putting up with excuses disguised as care. They perceive reality. This individual never desired their happiness. Only the authority to serve as their main compass. The weight of exposure is causing the bond they believe to be unbreakable to weaken. Blood ties are no exception, as those who formerly permitted interference now erect barriers. No more gaps that allow criticism to enter. No more discussions that are turned over to them like weapons. Our goal is clear: 1,000 voices united. Every subscriber, every like, every comment gets us closer. Stand with chosen Archangel today. They avoid letting family conflict control their serenity, attend fewer events, and divulge fewer details. They are at last realizing that distance and quiet are the first steps toward protection. The former lover comes next. When your person was at their weakest, that person clawed their way back. They sit across from someone who no longer views them as comfort but rather as a compromise after being exposed for what they are. Every moment they spend together is burdensome, a continual reminder that they could have welcomed the sun instead of settling for a shadow. What felt like a win now feels like a penalty. The fissures widen. The friend who made the demand demonstrates their inability to be loyal. The selfishness of the family member who claimed to know best is exposed. The same void is delivered by the partner who made the change promise. One by one, the masks come off, revealing to your person the awful reality of their true decision. Misery disguised as protection. And you emerge unharmed, prospering in ways that render their remorse moot. You draw opportunities that represent your development, connections that respect your essence, and doors that open in accordance with your value. From a distance, they see that your genius was never the problem. You weren't excessive. Their bravery was insufficient. They discover the truth too late. It was about their inability to become the person they were always destined to be, not about your worth. Some losses pass for blessings until the veil is removed over time. What used to feel like heartache has turned into your crown. Every restless night when you doubted your worth has been transformed into an unwavering belief in your identity. Every silent tear has transformed into wisdom that you can never lose. What you believed to be the shattering of your spirit was actually its strengthening. The irony is now evident. The very thing that brought you back to yourself was their absence. Their statements reflect the same constraints that caused the first fracture when they try to go back. They practice their apologies, stitching them together with justifications rather than responsibility. Although they lament the result, they won't question the trends that led to it. They don't regret the aftermath, but they do regret the attitude that caused it. They talk about perplexity, pressure, and anxiety. However, the indisputable truth is hidden behind all explanations. They were free to pick, and they didn't pick you. With shaky pens, they rewrite history, claiming that the influences around them, not themselves, were responsible. But the truth is more straightforward. They exchanged the treasure for trinkets after receiving it. They allowed outer noise to overpower their inner awareness while they were in front of someone who could see their soul. And now their excuses are hollow and their hands are empty. You don't seem desperate or vengeful in your reaction. Instead of begging, you greet their homecoming with peace. Your healing didn't wait for their apologies, so you move on with a grace they can't understand. You already know who you are, therefore you don't need their approval. They lost more than just your affection. Standing next to you gave them access to the version of themselves they could have become. Their attempts to regain what they lost seem phony as they rush to do so. They make appearances in locations they want you to notice, leave nostalgic remarks, and take up hobbies they used to make fun of. They believe that transformation can be replaced by imitation. They believe that gestures can conceal the lack of substantive change. However, you perceive the performance for what it is, a charade intended to impress rather than a transformational revelation. Their intentions are still obvious even when they break with former facilitators. They break off relationships based on strategy rather than growth in the hopes that the act would persuade you. Their consciousness does not change, but their behavior does. Change their habits, but not who they are. Although the costume appears well made, underneath it lies the same emptiness that formerly prevented you from being chosen. The narrative then turns back on itself. They watch you prosper from a distance they built, reliving old experiences and writing words that will never be strong enough. At last, they are compelled to acknowledge what you have always known. Their remorse is not your fault, and your value was never the issue. Facing oneself is their lesson. It was up to you to decide for yourself, and you did. Some realities are more painful when faced with oneself. The time came when they were angry not just at the people who had lied to them but also at themselves for becoming smaller, for suppressing their own instincts, and for caving into the views of those who profited from their diminution. This time, there was no room for tolerance as their rage transformed into gasoline. The people who had almost snatched their growth served as a reminder of the true cost of unquestioning loyalty. It is no longer acceptable to make the noise that used to drown out your name. Since they realized that allowing outside voices to contradict you was their worst error, they no longer permit others to change your tale. They are now burdened not only by missing you but also by the realization that the harm cannot be reversed. Their lingering regret has turned into both their initiation and their punishment. This regret serves as the catalyst for their delusions to ultimately burn out. For you, it's evidence that their approval was never a determining factor in your worth. Their realization of what they turned away from has brought them full circle from their rejection of the truth. However, that insight closes the door rather than reopening it. The time has passed by the time they are mature enough to decide on you. The spot where you waited is no longer where you are. Not out of resentment, but because you've advanced due to evolution. Reconciliation was never intended as the story's resolution. It was supposed to be about freedom. Your vindication has been their awakening. The truth of your eyes has silenced every murmur that questioned you. Now, everyone who said you were too much can see that people who share your energy are embracing, honoring, and celebrating your wholeness. The universe has made it hard to deny that the very light that they threw away is the one that is now being recognized somewhere else. The most important law of fate has been taught to them. Certain doors are designed to open just once. Some mistakes have lifelong consequences, and some souls cannot be replaced. That kind of love doesn't wait for the right moment. It comes at the appointed time. And if it is not respected, it keeps going on without turning around. You are a living example of this. The failure of someone to hold your essence does not diminish it. Your journey doesn't stop because someone made a poor decision. Their realization arrived too late, and their loss marked the start of your rise. They can now see what you've always carried, but you don't need their eyes to verify it. While you flourish in the fullness of what was always yours to claim, they are left to watch what they previously owned continue its journey toward its due destination. Certain endings provide coronation rather than closure. The person who was blind no longer has the last say in the matter. It's in yours. You stand unfazed now. Putting yourself first. Selecting your development over stagnation, your serenity over disorder, and your fortitude over concession. The gift was the lesson. You no longer need someone else to tell you how valuable you are. Rather, you look back with appreciation. Every rejection, every leave, and every cold shoulder served as a clearing path for people who could truly meet you. The benefit of redirection has sprung from what had felt like rejection. You were escorted into the arms of those who were meant to cherish you by the exact individuals who turned you away. Your worth was never in doubt. Their preparedness was the weak point. They lack the guts necessary for such a great act of love. No one's blindness lessens what you've always carried within you. Their hesitancy was evidence of what they were incapable of, not of what you had to offer. Chosen one, remember this: heaven never sends a word without purpose. If this message has stirred your spirit, let it shine brighter. Press like so the light spreads to others walking in darkness. Subscribe to Chosen Archangel so you never miss the next divine revelation. And share your thoughts in the comments below. Your testimony may be the very spark that awakens another soul. Until we meet again, stay